Luis and I spent half our lives trapped in a resentful marriage. Before we died, we glared at each other, hurling the most venomous words as we vowed never to cross paths in another life. He resented me for tying him down with marriage and kids, costing him his shot at pursuing a singing career in Beijing. I despised him for constantly carousing outside, abandoning his gravely ill parents and our 2 children to my care. Yet that resentment brought us back. We locked eyes in the crowd, then turned and walked away without a second thought, each heading our own way. This time, I hope neither of us has any regrets. On the day I modified my university application, my dad came into the study, glanced at me, and nodded with satisfaction. "Okay, with those high grades, you should aim for a top university. Stop chasing after that Lee boy. What's so great about him anyway?" Mom heard the commotion from the kitchen and rushed in, pulling him away with a stern look. I smiled watching them walk away, but suddenly felt tears welling up in my throat. In my past life, I'd sneaked out late at night and rushed to the train station to stop Luis, in a panic. My parents, worried for my safety, were hit by a drunk driver while racing after me. I never got to say goodbye. I held back tears and decisively clicked to finalize my application changes. In the previous life, Luis, my childhood friend, suddenly declared he wanted to become a singer and pursue his dream in Beijing. But before that, he'd always claimed that being together and attending the same college was his dream all along. To fulfill that dream, I sacrificed my chance at a prestigious university, throwing away my 600+ exam score just to attend the same second-tier college as him. But just 2 days before acceptance letters were due, he declared out of the blue that he was off to Beijing to pursue his music dream. That night, Mr. and Mrs. Lee showed up at our door, pleading for me to help find their son. In my previous life, I reluctantly went. Worried about me, my parents rushed after me, only to be killed in a car accident. After I found Luis, his parents confronted him point blank. "Your actions got her parents killed. You'd better make it up to her." So they forced Luis and me to get engaged, with marriage set for right after graduation. But by then, already pregnant during my sophomore year, I was forced to drop out early. We rushed to get married, and already pregnant, I soon gave birth and began taking care of our child. 2 years flew by in a whirlwind. I was eager to return to school, but then my in-laws fell seriously ill and came to us seeking treatment. Luis told me to be reasonable, reminding me that his parents had sacrificed to put him through school, and now they were ill and needed looking after. He insisted on going to work to support the family. At the time, to spare Luis's pride, I never brought up that his small paycheck couldn't cover the baby formula and our living expenses. In the end, I was forced to sell my hometown house to cover my in-laws' medical bills and barely scrape by supporting our 2 kids on my own. But while I gave up my education and worked tirelessly to support this large family, he squandered his meager earnings gallivanting with friends, chasing his pipe dream of becoming a singer. The weight of this family was crushing me. After I tried talking to him countless times only to hit a wall, we exploded into vicious fights. He called me harsh and narrow-minded, saying that if it weren't for me holding him back, he'd be a big star in Beijing by now. He even accused me of throwing my parents' death in his face to guilt-trip him into marrying me. I didn't hold back either, telling him straight that with his cracked voice, becoming a singer was pure fantasy. When he mentioned my parents' death, I lost control, lunged at him to shut him up, but he shoved me away hard. From then on, Luis deliberately stayed out. His parents, who never lifted a finger, blamed me for everything. They complained that I was unreasonable, narrow-minded, and constantly provoking their son. They'd completely forgotten how desperately they'd begged me to search for their own son. In this crumbling life, I clung on, scraping by day after day, taking whatever odd jobs I could find just to keep food on the table. But the children I raised with all my blood, sweat, and tears never truly bonded with me. They were always naturally drawn to Luis, despite him never caring about the family. I believed they'd eventually see my side when they got older. I waited over 20 years until they married and started their own families. But they all vied to take him in and have him move in with them. They were cold toward me. "Mom, you were way too controlling when we were kids, and we're sick of your lectures. You destroyed Dad's dreams. Now that he has the chance, we want to take him to Beijing so he can finally live out his dream. Grandpa and Grandma are right. You always want everyone to live exactly how you plan. You're so selfish. I never dreamed my own children would turn on me with those cruel words. When I returned home, heartbroken, I found Luis packing his bags, proudly announcing that he was leaving me to start a better life. After holding this family together for 2 decades, all I got in the end was being branded a selfish control freak. How could Luis always be so carefree? Despite neglecting the family, he somehow became the enlightened father in my children's eyes. I charged at Luis and shoved him with all my strength. Luis looked stunned for a split second before grabbing a vase and flinging it straight at me. "Don't you fucking touch me. I'll end you." So our deaths were ultimately the result of us punishing each other in that violent fight. As we fell, I prayed silently, spare me from ever meeting Luis again in the next life. The day I was reborn coincided with me revising my university choices. Seeing my parents right there beside me, I made up my mind then and there, no more getting mixed up with Luis or his business. After the college entrance exam, parties were happening everywhere. My close friends and I had just wrapped up one get-together when I spotted Luis in the distance, laughing and chatting with some friends. I heard Luis is dropping out of college to become a singer in Beijing. Wow, isn't that the whole Beijing dreamer craze right now? If he makes it big, should we grab some autographed photos now so they'll be worth a fortune later? April, you and Luis go way back, right? You must have heard what's up with this Beijing plan of his, a friend nudged me. I casually glanced over the crowd, and our eyes met as Luis happened to turn his head. In that instant, I knew Luis had been reborn too. Not sure. Actually, I should get going, Mom's expecting me early, I said without hesitation. If he wants to go to Beijing, so be it. What's that got to do with me? As Luis's departure day approached, I sweet-talked my parents into taking me to Grandma's to see the newborn ducklings, claiming I missed her terribly. My parents have always indulged me, so they packed our things and took me to Grandma's right then and there. Just then Mrs. Lee opened her door. Seeing us leaving, she froze, her eyes widening slightly. Off somewhere? My dad nodded cheerfully. Our girl is heading to Grandma's. We'll be away for a few days. Mrs. Lee gave a faint smile and nodded, her gaze lingering as we walked away. I tried to act casual, but my fists balled up as I fought to keep my feelings bottled inside. How ridiculous. I was actually fooled into thinking Mrs. Lee cared for me, when she'd had ulterior motives all along. She'd coveted our house for years. That's why after my parents died, she maneuvered so hard to force me into marriage with Luis. Back then, I had lost my parents and was drowning in sorrow every day. Mrs. Lee, with her kind and gentle demeanor, cared for me, leading me to lower my guard. Since I liked Luis too, I agreed without hesitation. Little did I know she had been scheming all along. I took a deep breath to quell the tremble of anger, forcing a smile as I chatted with my parents about the new pony Grandma had bought. But from the corner of my eye, I saw Luis hurrying off. Luis must have realized I was reborn too, so he needed to accelerate his plans to pursue his dream. When we arrived at Grandma's and were having dinner, my mom got a call from Mrs. Lee. Luis is hell-bent on going to Beijing to become a singer and quitting school. We've tried everything to talk him out of it, but nothing works. Could you ask April to come back and reason with him? They've always been close, and he actually listens to her. The words were identical to what she'd said in my previous life, repeating verbatim. My mom glanced at me with concern in her eyes. We were deep in the countryside now, and getting back wouldn't be simple. I calmly put down my chopsticks and took it from her. Mrs. Lee, this is Luis's decision. I can't get involved. If I tried, he'd just resent me. You should respect his choice, I said firmly, hanging up the phone without hesitation and blocking her number. My swift move left them speechless. Grandma was the first to speak, urging them to keep eating. She reminded them that others' problems were their own to bear, and we should stay out of it. I realized Grandma was completely right. After dinner, I knelt in the yard stroking a puppy's soft head as my parents approached. April, sweetheart, is something bothering you these days? Mom hesitated, eyes full of concern. You're just not acting like yourself. Dad remained silent, his gaze heavy with concern. Their concerned gazes made my eyes sting, and I wiped away tears that had started to fall. Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something. I had this dream. I lied and told them it was just a dream, recounting everything from my past life. When I told them how the Lee family had manipulated me after their deaths, Dad's face darkened like thunder. They'd always believed me, especially when I explained how it all began with Luis's decision to go to Beijing and Mrs. Lee asking me to track him down. They finally understood why I'd suddenly insisted on visiting Grandma's and why I refused to go after Luis. April, my dear, Mom said, tears welling up as she pulled me into a tight hug, comforting me with all her heart. Dad, pacing over to the window, stubbed out his cigarette and declared, I've made up my mind, we're moving. Given April's dream, it could mean the Lee family is our family's nemesis. I've made up my mind, we're moving, and we'll get as far away from them as possible. I never expected my parents to stand by me so completely. My eyes stung, and I nodded with fresh tears welling up. And I held her close, taking comfort in her warmth. After spending nearly half a month in the countryside, I had a bit of a tan. As we were leaving, Grandma packed the car trunk full of food for us. Before moving out, we still had to stay in the old house for a while. Across the street, Mrs. Lee's door swung open as we arrived home. Her eyes were bloodshot from crying, yet they betrayed barely concealed resentment. Why aren't you answering my calls? Mrs. Lee demanded, her face contorted in anger. Why won't you just come back and help me find Luis? Mrs. Lee suddenly yelled, startling my parents. They clearly hadn't expected her to be this angry. I stared coldly at her. After over 20 years as her daughter-in-law, I knew better than anyone how skilled she was at playing games and twisting the truth. My mom couldn't take it anymore and was about to speak, but I gently tugged her sleeve. Let's just head inside. There's no point in getting involved. Mom wrapped her arm around me, glaring fiercely at Mrs. Lee, but still couldn't resist snapping back. You can't even handle your own son, and you expect April to help? What kind of son is he? You've got the wrong person, I tell you. Once inside, Dad immediately started calling friends to arrange house viewings for that afternoon. If everything went smoothly, we could be moving as soon as tomorrow. Mom and I sat on the couch, and she absent-mindedly stroked my hair. It's okay, sweetie. We'll get far away from them soon enough. I nestled into her arms and whispered, The house hunting and moving flew by faster than I'd expected. The acceptance letter arrived even sooner. This time, without Luis or the car accident, I went to my school in relief to pick up the admission letter. When I got home, my parents were still discussing how much pocket money to give me. We laughed together, absolutely delighted. But sometimes, I still dream about my past life, how I sustained my family on my meager savings, enduring blame from my in-laws, misunderstandings from my children, and constant arguments with Luis, all while struggling through those difficult years. But thank goodness, this life, I had gotten a fresh start. School was about to start. As I stood there on campus, my parents were thrilled I'd switched my application. Back then, I had just buried my parents and was trudging in a daze alongside Luis toward a second-rate university on the outskirts. When people asked about our relationship, Luis would step back with an awkward smile and insist we were merely classmates though we were already engaged. I shook my head, dismissing those painful thoughts. I went with my parents to registration to check in as a new student. New school, new life. After my parents left with much reluctance, I settled right into the new environment, to my delight. I appreciated everything around me so much. In my past life, I had to pause my studies to raise my child and care for my family, but now I finally have the opportunity to continue. I was the happiest person alive. During the winter break, I brought home my scholarship money and earnings from writing articles, buying gifts for my parents. Their faces beamed, eyes disappearing into happy slits as they praised me for being their little treasure, their most cherished child. That evening, they prepared a feast together. As we sat around the dinner table chatting about our lives, my mom casually mentioned she'd run into Mrs. Lee a few days ago. She and Mr. Lee started selling vegetables at the market after they lost their jobs. They've been scraping by on relief funds, but it's barely enough. Mom sighed. Heard Luis landed some deal with a Beijing company. Training costs thousands monthly plus room and board. If he makes it? Great. If it doesn't work out. I lowered my head to pick at my food, but a scornful laugh bubbled up inside me. Luis wasn't going to succeed, and it wasn't a curse, just the plain truth. Luis had this compulsive need to show off. He was already bragging on social media the moment he signed with that shady company. But he was so caught up in bragging about landing the deal that he didn't even bother to verify the company's name. Moonlight Entertainment, a so-called talent agency that got busted as a scam operation back in my past life. They made money by recruiting trainees, charging them for lessons, then selling their contracts to another shady, unregulated company. Those trainees were in a dreadful plight. They shelled out tens of thousands for promised performance opportunities that never materialized, and learned nothing. They were eventually shipped off to another snake pit. I heard only one trainee got out, a kid from a wealthy family who paid millions in termination fees to buy back their freedom. Luis remained clueless, blissfully unaware as he dove headfirst into college life, joining every club he could find and letting that dream he'd been so determined to pursue slip away. And those rose-tinted memories of his dreams only resurfaced when we fought, and even then, only to pin all the blame on me. Mom didn't dwell on it. Mom, ever the optimist, shifted to a lighter topic with Dad, and soon they were laughing together. I smiled as I listened, my eyes crinkling at their stories. After we moved, I thought I'd never see the Lee family again, but the very next day, while meeting a friend and walking past a store, Mrs. Lee materialized and seized my arm. She looked drained, with sunken eyes and chapped lips. Her eyes were sunken, her lips dry, with an overall sickly appearance. My friend hadn't arrived yet, and seeing me alone, Mrs. Lee's face lit up with a smile. She clutched my arm and started going on about how we'd vanished without a word, and how her son was stuck in Beijing for training and couldn't even make it home for New Year's. Mrs. Lee, I pulled my arm away. Excuse me, I'm meeting someone. Her reaction froze at my icy tone. After gathering herself, she stepped right in front of me and spoke in a scolding tone. April, what's gotten into you? I already forgave you for ignoring my calls, and now you're being so rude. Mrs. Lee eased her posture, smoothed her hair, and slipped back into a coaxing tone. I know you've always had a soft spot for Luis. Now that he's in Beijing chasing stardom, if you're still keen on him, it could work out. I could tell from the sudden shift in her eyes that she was plotting something. I heard you've moved to a bigger place. That old house of yours probably hasn't been sold yet, right? How about this, dear, give me the keys. I'll watch over it and keep it tidy. If you're away during New Year's, you can come stay with us. That way Luis will know it's being looked after, and he'll rest easy. Mrs. Lee continued, boldly spelling out her scheme. Once she got her hands on the keys to our old house, she could rent it out and cash in. And if I spent New Year's at her place, it wouldn't just prove to my parents that I wasn't intimidated by them, but she'd also land a free babysitter and a walking ATM for the holidays. Did she really think I wouldn't see through that? I just smiled and casually agreed. Okay, Mrs. Lee, just hold tight, I'll get back to you soon. I'll chat with my parents. And don't you worry about buying a thing, I've got it all covered for when I come over. Mrs. Lee was thrilled, gushing praise before she finally lingered away. I brushed off where she'd grabbed me, sneering as I walked away without looking back. I had a wonderful time this New Year. As for Luis's parents, I'm sure they didn't fare any better. Needless to say, I didn't give them the keys or bring any food. During New Year's, fresh produce is hard to come by, let alone veggies, fruit, rice, or noodles. Even if you do find any, the price tag has doubled. They now have to support their son chasing his dreams, so they couldn't afford such expenses. I didn't hide that I tricked Mr. and Mrs. Lee. I told my dad straight out that Mrs. Lee was still trying to rope me in as their nanny. My dad was furious that I hadn't pushed back harder. Shameless. What are they trying to pull, roping my college daughter into caring for those old folks? Dad glared. If they stir up any trouble, I'll handle it. Utter nonsense. I couldn't help but laugh at Dad's blatant favoritism, though it left me feeling slightly dizzy. Little did I expect that before the new year ended, Luis would come back and show up with a girl. I bumped into Luis and the girl on the street, wrapped in each other's arms and whispering sweet nothings. When Luis spotted me, he instinctively pulled away from the girl. Stumbling back, her face fell instantly. What the hell, Luis? After all your begging to bring me here, now you ditch me? Luis immediately flustered. He rushed to reassure the girl while stealing glances at me. Perhaps 20 years of marriage had conditioned him to constantly be on the lookout for any hint of betrayal. Even though we were apart now, those reflexes hadn't faded. I glanced at him, and as my eyes fell on the girl beside him, she looked familiar. After a moment's thought, it dawned on me. I suddenly realized why, in my previous life, everything was going well, but Luis abruptly decided to head to Beijing to become a singer. It finally made sense why Luis never brought up the past, even when we were together. I also understood why Luis ended up hating me so much. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. When my mocking gaze met Luis's, I cursed under my breath, turned, and left without a second thought. The girl was Ondine, who'd briefly transferred into our senior year class. She was young, beautiful, and vibrant, a far cry from our bookish classmates. Honestly, during her brief time at our school, Ondine became every boy's crush. I didn't expect Luis to fall for her too. One day when the classroom lights went out, Luis sang a song by candlelight, and Ondine gushed over him, telling him he was so talented he could become a singer in Beijing right then. Ondine was from Beijing, and back then, for us living in a small town, the very mention of Beijing felt like a distant world, almost unreachable. It all clicked. After Ondine left, Luis's attitude toward me shifted. He began criticizing me for not being as ladylike or graceful as Ondine. He said I was too wrapped up in my studies and had no interest in seeing the world. He said I didn't know how to dress and had wasted my best years. I let out a bitter laugh. At the time, I foolishly believed he was giving me advice for my own good. Now I get it, that wasn't the case at all. Unable to find any hint of Ondine in me, and frustrated by it, he started nitpicking at everything I did. Even when we got married, he remained cold and distant. After we registered, he suddenly sneered, "Finally got what you wanted?" As if I'd made him marry me and be with me. He couldn't help himself, yet expected me to take the fall. That was just how Luis dealt with his problems. I don't know how Luis got back in touch with Ondine after moving to Beijing, but I do know the Lee family had a pretty wild year. Word has it that Ondine hadn't even been at the Lees for half an hour before storming out in a rage. Luis chased after his dream girl as she stormed out, heading straight back to Beijing without so much as a goodbye to his parents. Of course, my nosy mom secretly got the scoop. Mrs. Lee tried to lay down the law the moment she met Ondine. But Ondine wasn't one to be pushed around. She fired back and even flipped that greasy dining table at the Lee house, then stormed out. My parents took delight in the Lee family's embarrassment and happily sent me back to university, urging me to focus solely on my studies and put everything else behind me. In my free time, I began writing more articles and quietly finished 3 books, each over 1,000,000 words. The pay was pretty generous. But then Luis sent me a friend request out of the blue. I kept turning him down, yet he kept creating new accounts to get through. Frustrated, I finally gave in and accepted. After we became friends, Luis barely made small talk before almost immediately complaining how tough life had been since he moved to Beijing. In a city teeming with dream chasers, he was barely scraping by. His silver tongue and boyish charm were all he had going for him to catch Ondine's eye. But once they were together, the pedestal he'd placed the elegant, high-class Ondine on began to crumble. After the honeymoon phase wore off, Luis couldn't help reverting to type and started demanding Ondine wait on him hand and foot. But Ondine was different. Dating Luis was already a step down for her, so she'd never dream of doting on him the way I used to. As a result, Luis was quickly dumped, and his management company folded shortly afterward. I kept his messages on mute, but I'd still check them occasionally. I couldn't help but laugh when I saw this message: "I'm so unlucky to end up with this company practicing singing 14 hours a day. If I were still in school, I'd be way happier. Ugh, all the women in Beijing are such gold diggers. I'm not famous yet, but I will be soon. Why can't they even agree to have a drink with me? I moved to a new company, but it's just as bad. If I'd known, I'd never have come to Beijing. Beijing's not all it's cracked up to be. Folks back home were way more real." True, folks in our small town are genuinely kind-hearted, which is exactly how the Li family exploited me in my past life, treating me like their servant. The whole time, I was the only fool. The reality is, whichever path Luis chose, he'd end up regretting it. Because he never truly made an effort, nor did he attempt to achieve anything. He was used to having everything handed to him, but whenever things went south, he'd point fingers at others. He imagined taking a different path would have turned out better. People always romanticize the paths not taken, and Luis was just the same. Selfish, cowardly, irresponsible, and always quick to escape. That's Luis. His grand dreams turned out to be as ordinary as anything once he actually tried them. Once I fully realized this, I blocked Luis for good and changed all my contacts for good. Someone like him belongs in the past, rotting in the gutter. But I never expected Luis to actually track me down in Beijing after I cut off contact. During my sophomore year, I earned some money from writing and leveraged knowledge from my past life to launch a small media company. I signed several promising new media influencers who hadn't made it big in my past life and started helping them manage their accounts. Before long, their profiles started gaining traction. Soon, we were flooded with ad offers. I was so busy juggling my studies and the company that eventually, I brought my parents to the city and bought them a house. They were overjoyed, bragging to their friends about their daughter's success and constantly scrolling through short videos to find more influencers for me to recruit. One day, right after finishing an exam, I hurried out of the school to attend a company meeting. As soon as I stepped off campus, I felt someone grab me from behind without warning and wouldn't let go. "Wife, I've finally found you." I gasped at the familiar voice but choked back my shock. Shoving him off, I found myself staring at Luis. Luis wore an old leather jacket, his face smudged with cheap makeup. When he forced a sickly grin, his yellowed and stained teeth turned my stomach. Luis reeked of cheap perfume and lunged for another hug, but I sidestepped him. "I know you've been reborn too, my wife. You have no idea what I've been through without you." Luis rambled on, and within moments, I pieced together what had happened. He learned about my media company through Mrs. Lee's chatter and came across my influencers' accounts online. When Luis realized I'd become a successful businesswoman, instead of pursuing his dreams in Beijing, he decided reuniting with me was his top priority. He blocked my path, putting on an emotional show. "Honey, we're born again now, but we can still give us another shot. Remember? We have 2 lovely kids." Back then, our whole family was truly happy together. I glared at his pathetic act, rolling my eyes almost instinctively. "Seriously, bro? Still dreaming? Did you forget why we ended up here?" Luis's expression shifted, and his eyes darted nervously. "I refused to relive that nightmare, but damn am I thrilled to be free of you." Disgust heavy in my breath. "You always blame me for ruining your dreams and trapping you in marriage, then take it out on me and the kids with your abuse. Luis, let me ask you, what happened to your dream of becoming a singer? Where did all those glory days go? And why haven't you brought your mother, the empress of your life, to Beijing?" "Let me guess." I slowly and disdainfully shook my head at him. "In this life, your mother's still sick and slaving away for your dreams, isn't she? I heard you even sold the house for that electric guitar. Do you finally see it now, Luis?" Luis's face twisted, his eyes turning dangerous. He grabbed my arm. "April, what's there to be so proud of? Whatever you do now, you're still the woman I fucked and the one who raised my kids for 20 goddamn years. You think you can just run away 'cause we got reborn? Luis sneered coldly, his malicious gaze fixed on me. You're famous now. If I start blabbing about your birthmarks, your intimate secrets, you were always a slut. See how your company survives that. Try me. I wrenched my arm free, my eyes flaring with icy contempt. You always resort to such pathetic tricks to get your way, Luis. Can't you earn respect like a decent person? I alerted the doorman that Luis wasn't affiliated with the school. He immediately restrained him while I flagged down a cab and made my escape. As soon as I got back to the office, I called one of the lesser-known influencers and spent the afternoon discussing things with her. A short video skit became a viral sensation online. The main story centered on a young girl who, at her neighbor's urging, went to the train station late at night to meet up with a man she liked. However, while her parents chased after her, worried sick about her safety, they were in a car accident on the way. The seemingly kind neighbor capitalized on the situation, pushed aside the girl's other relatives, and pressured her into an engagement with her son. The neighbor even ends up gradually acquiring the family's property. My own story about Luis became a short play. Given that this genre was still relatively new and the content was part fact, part fiction, it quickly went viral online. The guy is such a loser. His wife works her fingers to the bone every day, while he just lounges around eating and drinking, dreaming of becoming a singer. What kind of singer spends all day talking instead of actually working? Even after being reborn, he's still chasing the girl he couldn't get. How shameless is that? If I had a son like that, I'd drown him at birth. His parents are just as bad, all useless. Comments flooded in, and the blogger behind the video became an overnight sensation, racking up millions of followers. I took the opportunity to arrange several ads for her, and she earned a tidy sum. Of course, Luis wasn't about to let me off that easily. He started spreading nasty rumors about me online, implying that our relationship was shady. Some disgusting men even fell for it and joined in the abuse. I wasn't going to tolerate it. I sent each of them a cease and desist letter. Given how wildly different my past and present lives were, who would believe his lies about some rebirth fantasy? The law caught up with Luis. His posts had been shared over 30,000 times, and he'd paid a troll army to amplify his smear campaign. He'd sealed his own fate. Lee's family were desperate, trying to hunt for our contact details, but they came up empty-handed. Around the same time, his Beijing employer sued him. He had violated company policies by taking unauthorized leave and engaging in improper conduct. When I heard this, I was actually a bit surprised. It seemed Luis had a talent for catching the eye of powerful people, always for the wrong reasons. Luis had someone contact me, pleading for help to get him a good lawyer. He swore he'd pay me back once he was free. Repay me? More like he's after revenge, I thought. I had his ass thrown out with a terse reply, dream on. Dream on. Though I might move on without seeking revenge, that didn't mean I'd ever forgive and forget. I longed to witness Luis's world collapse and watch my former in-laws spend their twilight years scrambling after his mess. I slipped on my sunglasses and made my way to the office. The right path in life, my life will shine brightly and be brilliant. Epilogue. When police took him in, he was stunned into silence. Confronted by the police's accusations, he instinctively wanted to argue back, but found himself speechless. He finally ground out through clenched teeth, "We're married." Yes, we were married. His mother had kept reminding us of that. But traditionally, the husband's always been the one who wears the pants. I, a lonely orphan unwanted by others, should be grateful he even chose me. At one point, Luis thought I was fine, obedient, understanding, and easily flustered at just a few words. But when Ondine appeared, that fiery red rose rekindled every adolescent longing Luis had ever buried. In contrast, I'd always kept my distance. After we got married, Luis learned from a high school classmate that Ondine had returned to Beijing, enrolled in college, and even dated a famous singer before she graduated. When they went public, it blew up online. Luis burned with jealousy. If he'd chased his dream, could he have ended up with Ondine instead of some famous singer? So, he began to resent me, blaming me for crushing his dreams. Had it not been for me, his parents would still be alive, and he wouldn't have been forced to marry me. It was all my fault. If I hadn't forced him into marriage, he might still have had a chance to chase his dreams. For 20 years, Luis tormented me, delighting in my worsening temper, convinced it was his punishment. He poisoned our children against me by telling them I was a terrible mother, until they turned their backs on me. But he never imagined how his second chance would turn out. He never imagined his second chance would be so different from his dreams. He was utterly spent. He even began to long for those times I looked after him. When he heard I had money now, he figured we could patch things up. Maybe I could strike it rich with April's money, he thought. But his dream came crashing down instantly with his arrest. Even worse, his company sued him over the scandal. Upon realizing the enormous fines and prison sentence awaiting him, Luis panicked. This can't be happening. This can't be my life. Could he have another chance? Inside prison, as they shaved off his dyed bright hair, he stared at his reflection in the mirror, closed his eyes, and a tear escaped. He was overwhelmed with regret. Was there any way to start over?